I'd like to call to the podium Jason Lukaszewicz from Moss Adams. And Moss Adams has been our partner sponsor. And we appreciate anytime we pick up the phone. Jason, you guys are right there to help us out. And great luncheon tax seminar today. So if you want to take a moment to say a few words, come on up.
Thanks, Kathy. Well, we very much appreciate the opportunity to partner with SoReady. Obviously, SoReady is a great organization, and we appreciate that opportunity. The tax seminar this morning was a great opportunity for us to contribute to the community and let people know what's going on with the tax reform law, which obviously there's a lot of questions and a lot of changes, so we appreciated that as well. I think that's about it. Like I said, we appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thank you, all of you for being here and supporting SoReady as well.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Kathy.
Every year I stress out about saying your name. So our next speaker today is Dr. Todd Bloomquist. Todd has been working in education since 1989 and has served in the public schools since 1991. He's worked in both elementary and secondary schools as a teacher, assistant principal, and principal. He is currently the Director of School Improvement for the Grants Pass School District. Todd received his doctorate in education from George Fox University and enjoys teaching as an adjunct faculty member at Southern Oregon University. In his career, Dr. Bloomquist has worked in a number of different capacities. For many years, he supervised the career and technical education programs for high school students. As a certified adverse childhood experience trainer, which is also known as ACE, there's a clear connection between the adversity that students experience in their developmental years and their overall health and wellness as adults. Adversity can have an impact on decision-making centers of the brain that include self-regulation, motivation, and moral choices. Adversity has a direct impact on one's ability to obtain and retain employment, and we heard earlier about trying to fill that employment gap. You'll see how this relates to your workforce. We hear continuously that workforce is the biggest barrier for businesses. Todd will be able to provide you valuable information on how to deal with challenges that may be a different approach than what you're used to with employees. So please join me in welcoming Todd Bloomquist.
Guess that goes there. If I spill it, you all know where it goes. Well, good afternoon. It is an absolute privilege to be here. It was great to see lots of friends and colleagues early on before we got started here, so I appreciate that opportunity as well. Kind of weird to have me here at your business meeting a little bit, don't you think? What I'm going to do is talk to you about economics without talking about economics at all. And that pathway is about this thing called adverse childhood experiences. And it absolutely is something that we're learning about as educational institutions, but it's much more complicated than that. And it has a direct impact on what we're all trying to do, which is have good lives, happy lives, well people, making good choices, those kinds of things. So what I'm going to do for you this afternoon is just kind of give you a taste of what the training is that we've been doing in this community, Southern Oregon. There are 5 of us that have been trained to do the full-blown ACES curriculum with folks, and we've just trained 10 new people to start sharing that out as well, so we have some more folks to help us out. I probably do 1 to 2 full ACES trainings a week. And yep, I still have my day job, right? So that all has to fit in there someplace. And so what I thought we would do today is kind of get a taste of that. I think part of that is adversity is kind of a depressing topic, so I'm going to go through that. But you kind of have to understand it, right? And then we're going to talk about the resiliency aspects that actually do work and that we're doing right now. As of actually this morning, because I just spent 6 hours training 75 mentor teachers to mentor brand new teachers on ACES. It's about 6.5 hours of a workshop this morning. And so I've been talking all day, actually. And the work that goes out there. We've probably shared this with about 8,500 people now in the last 12 months. So that's kind of a cool thing. So yeah, I know. That's a really good thing. I like it. So being workforce ready. So the way this works is that we've got to think about this little baby. The little baby in the hands of the man there. It's one of my favorite pictures of our whole slide deck. And this comes to us by way of one of the co-authors of the ACEs study, Dr. Rob Anda, and his partner, Laura Porter. They put most of this curriculum together and over the course of a decade figured out what really works with sharing this information out so we can transform our community and really help people become resilient. Just because you've had adversity doesn't mean you're done. It doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean you can't be successful. As I look around this room, I am confident there are a lot of people in here who have endured a lot of adversity, and you are successful. And the resiliency pieces that come along with this training are absolutely important. As we do this work in our schools, we're just starting to get this going, by the way. But I can tell you what, if you like numbers, the work that we did in our pilot study with trauma-informed practices in one of our schools reduced behavioral referrals by 31%. So in a classroom terms, that means kids are self-regulated learning, right? And as we get in deeper this a little bit, you'll see, oh, that's kind of an important deal because that translates to the workforce all day long, right? So thinking about the little guy there, I want you to think about us as human beings as really whole body memory machines. All the experiences that we have go into making this person. So the age-old debate of nature versus nurture, the answer is yes. You get what you get when you're born, and then whatever else is going on around you, that also impacts how you develop, okay? It's a very big deal. So right here is kind of the mock-up of the human skeleton. You can kind of see there the neural pathways. So we think mostly about the brain, right? Because that's where we remember everything. But remember that the brain's connecting through the spinal column out to the periphery nerves, and your whole body will remember certain kinds of events. In fact, lots of great studies out there where brain scanning somebody while they're in the middle of a crisis or some kind of event, and then later on, even weeks and months later, just remembering the event, the same parts of the brain fire up again. So your whole body is sort of thrown right back there again. You've had experiences where you smelled something or a door slammed or somebody said something and your whole body went, whoa, I just had a moment, right? And that's a whole body experience. So it's the whole body thing. That little nerve cell there, kind of important, right? That's all there at the base of the whole thing. When we think about the ways that people adapt to the world, we think about them in kind of two extreme pathways here. So thinking about the bottom pathway there, the safe pathway. So I basically have at least a competent parent at home. I'm never really worried about food. I kind of always know where I go to sleep at night, right? Those things don't change for me. I grow up as a possibility, process, people-oriented kind of person. I like to dialogue through things. When hard things happen, we talk it through and we work it through. So I have a plan, I process that kind of thing. Very good at surviving under best case scenarios. Actually a little vulnerable when there's a crisis because I'm used to talking it through. And when a crisis happens, it kind of throws my game off a little bit, right? The pathway on the top there with the little Home Alone guy. So you've got the dangerous world, which is just the opposite. So I'm not always certain about my parent, right? I'm not always certain about my food. In fact, food might almost always come from school on a regular basis. Grants Pass School District, just so you know, 100% free lunch and free breakfast for all kids. That's based on the federal poverty level. If you hit a threshold, that means everybody gets free food. Okay? That's not a whole lot different here in Jackson County. Okay? It's a big deal. Somebody grows up in that pathway, they tend to be sort of a fight, flight, or freeze response kind of person. That's the pathway that you practice. And so because of the neural density and the pathways and the structures there, that's kind of your go-to. When something happens, fight, flight, freeze. Kind of in that order, actually. Right? And all of us kind of have our own pathway on that one. Really great at surviving worst-case scenarios. Okay? So quick response. When I was a brand new assistant principal at Crater High School, right? I went from being a rock star classroom English teacher. Everybody knew me. I love the world. I go to be a disciplinarian. Everybody hates me. Right? Because you're disciplining everybody, right? But when there was a crisis, I have a lot of adversity in my background. So I was really mellow when the crisis was happening. I would say, hey, I need you to do this, and I need you to do that. We're going to do this thing over here, and we're going to be fine. And that's how we did that. And then I would collapse after it was all over, right? Other folks, oh, what are we going to do? It just depends on where you're from, right? And so we just need each other to work it through. So those are kind of the two extremes. If we think about that whole concept again. Safe world on the bottom, dangerous world on the top idea. The brain starts in that neutral position, prepares for the anticipated world. The adults, and I'm going to talk about positive, stable, competent, and caring adults. I'll say that a lot. Positive, stable, competent, caring. If you need the mnemonics, PSCC, if you could remember that, positive, stable, competent, caring, it makes a significant difference. That's a resiliency aspect. Positive stresses are buffered and protected by adults in the world, and then biology and societal expectations kind of align. That's what we're hoping for. The problem is this one. And that little red bit there, the toxic stress. That's the one that's a complicated thing. And toxic stress is defined as when your body is under stress, that is, your body's releasing adrenaline and cortisol into its system, and it's staying there for too long, and you don't have some adult around to help you with that. That's toxic stress. Okay, and when we look at the numbers from the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, it's about 1 in 4. Now think about it. Let that number sit into for a minute there. About 1 in 4 of us come from environments that are toxic stress. We didn't have somebody to help us with that adversity as it was going on, and so we developed in that situation. And so as adults, we kind of respond to the world that way too, okay? I kind of liken toxic stress to, I like to hike, and Southern Oregon's a great place if you like to hike, right? Anybody been out on a trail when you actually saw a real bear? Not in a zoo, like in a, yeah. So what happens, right? Something happens to your body very quickly, right? Adrenaline dumps in. Suddenly, if I was tired, I'm not tired anymore, right? Another thing called cortisol dumps into your system, and cortisol is a great thing about reducing pain. The problem with cortisol in particular is that when it's in your system for too long, it acts like a neurotoxin, and it literally will snip off brain cells saying, you don't need that because you're under stress. And when your body's in a constant state of stress, if you live with a bear, so you're always ready to go. Now, I'm pretty confident. I feel good about myself in the woods. I see a bear. I get adrenaline. I believe I can outrun the bear. It's not true. Yeah, I know. But I believe that I can. I've got cortisol. If I'm hurting at all, I don't care. I'm just going to run, right? So we know that. So it takes about 20 minutes for those chemicals to get out of your system. Those hormones come in. It's about 20 minutes. Toxic stress is I live with a bear, so I'm constantly being re-triggered. My body's got a flood of adrenaline and cortisol all the time. Studies with children out of really chronic adverse situations, sleeping heart rate. Think about this number, 160. I'm sound asleep, and it's 160 beats per minute, okay? That kid is ready to go whenever anything happens, right? I'm ready to go. Big deal. Okay, so we go all the way through this. That last little bit there, the dissonance, that disconnect between my biology and what the rest of the world expects of me. And this is where we start talking about employment, don't we? This is about driving on the streets, obeying laws. This is what our police force is always struggling with, folks. Hey, dude, it's the law. Just follow the law. Like, no, you don't understand. I don't play that game. I play a different game. Like, really? 1 in 4 are coming from that toxic stress environment where coloring inside the lines of society is really complicated. Okay? Are you ready for audience participation? Sorry, I'm a school teacher. So if you can, hands down. If you can, grab a wrist. Your wrist. Grab your wrist. Grab your wrist. And then fold your thumb down like this and fold your fingers down like this. This comes to us from Dr. Dan Siegel, who works with children. And we teach this to little guys, but I have to tell you what, this works even better for adults. Okay, because when you're in the wrong part of your brain, sign language is a very, very helpful thing. So what this means is this is your brain-hand model. Brain stem out to your peripheral nerves. Your thumb is going to represent your limbic system, your emotional center of the amygdala, okay? It asks a very important question all the time. Safe, unsafe. Safe, unsafe. Not complicated, right? Okay, now think of the world that people live in. The fingers over the top, that represents your prefrontal cortex, your thinking part of your brain. This is where we want to be all the time. I want to be here thinking, okay? Except I see a bear. Ding, 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 ding. Amygdala says unsafe, and so it flips the lid of the brain. Kicks out the thinking part, the cortex, and it kicks up adrenaline and cortisol. because you don't want to be thinking about the bear, you want to be getting away from the bear, so you want to run. It's an emotional thing. Now, what's fascinating, when we teach this to little kids who grow up in chronic toxic stress environments, they go here all the time, right? So now suddenly they're not learning at all because they're in the wrong part of the brain. They're in their downstairs brain, sometimes we call that. But we teach them, because you can retrain the brain, right? So you teach them what's the pathway. So kid tricks like this, they tell the teacher, oh, I'm kind of here. And the teacher says in a kind way, hey, Sally, it's okay for you to get that drink of water that you wanted right now, because that's part of their plan. And she goes and gets her drink of water because they've talked about this. She goes to look at a picture book in the back of the classroom, looks at the fish in the fish tank, whatever it is their plan is, because she has about 20 minutes to get her brain back here again. And so rather than her exploding and running around the classroom, she de-escalates, she teaches herself how to get self-control, and then she comes back to her seat, actually. Some of our most dysregulated children that are coming to us, described as feral children by our kindergarten teachers. By about October, November, we can get them here most often with just practice like that. Really great for adults. I've had teachers running into my office at various times. They can't even say the words. It's something like this. Bum, 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 bum. I got you, man. Let's go for a walk. And we go for a walk, we de-escalate, and then we can talk about it, okay? Now think about that little symbol there. You'll do this involuntarily now with your friends, and your spouses will go, what are you doing? Teach them the brain-hand model, right? Yeah, make sure which fingers you're throwing up. I don't know. So as you're going through this, though, think about when we're trying to problem solve things. Usually we're kind of here, right, in our downstairs brain, our most stressed state. We're trying to do thoughtful things in this state. It's probably not a good idea. And that's why when we try to even discipline kids in that state, the kids are here, but also the adults are here, right? And so we're also not making very good choices at that time. So what we're trying to do is help the kids to de-escalate and get in control of that. It's a great gift to each other. So remember that brain-hand model, Dr. Dan Siegel, good guy. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I just don't have time, but I just wanted you to get a sense of, in the training that we offer, we kind of get into the brain stuff. It does feel a little bit like you're in a master's level biology course for a little while. So we get there for a little bit, but this slide is basically intended just to show you all the parts of the brain that are impacted through adversity or the lack thereof. So neglect is just the other half of that, right? But you see the different ways that we can impact neurodevelopment all the way through development. And we're not talking about like ages 0 through 5 or 6 anymore. We're talking about late teenage and that very last little bit here into adulthood where it talks about the cortex and thinking and judgment. That's all stuff in the late teens, early 20s. And when we look at the data from the people from the ACEs study and what they reported out on their early childhood experiences, some of that went into those teen years. And what we know now, trauma in teen years actually has a long-term impact. Things that happened to you when you were going through those teen years, some of those things you'd like to not remember, right? They still impact you today. And that last stage of development, the word that's important to me, but the other ones, their judgments are just important, but is hope. And hopelessness can happen right in the middle of high school years. When we get our data back on our healthy teen surveys, when our kids tell us how they're doing, about 46% report being hopeful. That's not even half, right? What are the things that we can do to help each other be hopeful? We would be giving a huge gift to each other, wouldn't we? So that's what that's meant to do. We talked about the brain-hand model, but also this is just a symbol representative. We do this in schools. This comes to us via Walla Walla, Washington. There is a documentary out there called Paper Tigers. Has anybody heard of that? Paper Tigers? A couple of you? You can rent it off of Netflix. About a year-long look-see at an alternative school in Walla Walla, Washington that went from being one of the lowest performing schools in the world, because it was an alternative school, to, hey, not too bad. And within 3 years, they shifted all of their data. But they used symbols like this to let the kids know when they were struggling, when is a good time to talk to you? So put the responsibility back on the kid. So when is it a good time? Are you in the green zone? And we can have that conversation right now. Are you in the yellow zone? That might be after next period. Red zone, it's definitely tomorrow, because some of these kids are triggering all the time. Right, so we want to get them in their best state when they're here. When that happens, kids resolve their conflicts, just like you'd want them to, and they actually fix it. When they're here and we're trying to resolve that stuff, we do the same thing tomorrow, and the same thing tomorrow, and the same thing the next day. But this was the big shift, to let them be in the right part of their brain So we think about that in the work that we're doing when we're having difficult conversations with people. When's the right time to have the conversation? It might be when I'm here versus when I have, well, if your heart rate's over 100, you're having an adrenaline cortisol rush. Did you know that? You can do that. If you're feeling a little stressed, count your beats. If you're at 100, you're there. You might want to take about 20 minutes and cool down, right? So that's what that's all about. We talked very quickly about epigenetics, and this is basically you can change your genes by the trauma that's going on and then pass it along to your children. We didn't know that before. Complex studies to figure that out, but we can't figure out why poverty seems to be intergenerational for some folks. It really is more about the trauma that gets passed along. Okay? And it's even something we call historical trauma, where you have cultures that have been oppressed for generations. They will bring out all of those qualities to their children. It's a survival technique. Be ready for this, ready to go right when you're born, because this stuff is painful. And so we pass it along. Good news is, when an interrupt happens, it takes about 4 to 6 generations, and that trauma that's added to the DNA coding goes away. So that's the hopeful bit. Once we stop this, it actually shifts everything for everybody. It's a very cool thing. It's very deep, and we have no time to talk about it today. These are the two guys in the ACEs study itself. So when we say ACEs, it's Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, okay? The guy on the left there, Dr. Vincent Felitti, actually presented here about 2 years ago, 3 years ago maybe now, and I got to see him here. That was the first time I got to be introduced to him. The guy on the right, Dr. Rob Anda, who trained me in this curriculum, so I got to know that guy pretty well. But they're the ones, so Dr. Anda working through the Centers for Disease Prevention and Control, working with anxiety and smoking connection. Why is this going on in the late 80s and 90s? If people know that smoking is bad, why don't they just quit? It's not that easy, right? Dr. Vincent Felitti was working in an obesity clinic in Southern California, and his patients were always talking about their childhood, just like Dr. Rob Anda's were, and they looked at the literature, and there was no literature on this. There was no connection between childhood and a chronic adult health problem. And so they had to study it. And what they did is they studied over 17,000 people participate. It's a very large population study. And what they found are some of these most amazing facts. They found out that in this pyramid schematic model, that they knew the top 3 things were true. We knew that adoption of health and risk behaviors would lead to disease, disability, and social problems, and probably early death. The study was a hypothesis down at the bottom level there then. If somebody had adverse childhood experiences, would that disrupt their neural development? That might lead to social, emotional, cognitive impairment, and the adoption of health risk behaviors, and then disease, disability, and then possibly early death. And the answer is emphatically yes. And when we look at the data from the study, it's incredibly compelling. Like, if I couldn't get this kind of data in the studies that I was doing. This is amazing stuff. So we know emphatically this is true. These are the 10 ACEs, if you've ever wondered. And this is basically, if any one of these happened to you below the age of 18, then that's a 1, and it's a maximum 1 for every category. There's lots of other things that they could have studied, but quite frankly, you have to put a limit on things. So essentially, you've got substance abuse in the household. This is, in my household, under the age of 18, was this present or did this happen to me? Substance abuse, 27%. Parental separation or divorce, 23%. What's the national average generally? Say your gut, what is that? 50? Yeah, it's generally about 50%. So this population had a better than average rate of staying together as couples. 17% mental illness, 13% reported their mothers were beaten, 6% reported somebody in my household went to jail, 15% reported emotional neglect, 10% reported physical neglect, and check out these numbers under the abuse piece. They're 11% emotional, but 28% reported physical abuse, and this last number right here, which should just stop everything right there, 21% reported being sexually abused. When you look at studies on sexual abuse, usually you see numbers like, oh, it's 6 to 12% someplace in there. We always knew it was an underreported number. 21%. Most of the 50 states have replicated this study. The data are almost always the same. Okay? This is incredibly depressing. I'm really sorry. So let's move to resilience, right? Let's get there. So when we look at the population itself very quickly, about a third of the population doesn't experience any of those ACEs. So about a third, and that's consistent. There was an Oregon study done in 2011, 2013. It was 34% was the number. So again, very close. You have 26% reporting 1 ACE, 16% reporting 2 ACEs, 10% reporting 3, and then 16% reporting 4 or more. When we get to 4 or more, we start now looking at a lot of chronic health problems that are happening to people in a population. Okay. All of the data in that study, and there's hundreds of slides of data if you like data, they look like this, and it's called a dose response, and that's how we know there's such a correlation to high ACEs in a population and chronic health problems. So dose response is basically defined like this. The more gas you have, the farther you get to go. So in this case, the more ACEs you have, more likely that you have chronic health problems. Okay, there's a direct relationship in a population. It does not mean if something bad happened to you, you're going to have health problems. It means in a population, if there are a lot of adversity, there's a lot of health problems. So our CCOs have jumped on this, have actually sponsored training, those kinds of things, because they recognize down the road, this is a big deal. Right? And there's data out there to suggest as a community, if we bring adversity down, the quality of life starts going up. And the cost to the community goes down. In Washington State, in one of the projects in Cowlitz County, they estimated investing about $3.6 million a year into this work of reducing ACEs in a community. They estimated, this is a conservative estimate, about $120 million annual savings. Now think about that as an investment opportunity. $3.6 million on the front end, the community saving about $120 million a year. That's significant. And I'm going to run out of time. I wanted to show you this one here while we're all depressed. Pathways to poverty, homelessness. So this is where we start talking about what comes to you as employers, right? So kids that are in crisis, that are developing this way, they're quick response, right? They're living with a bear all the time. This is their go-to, not in their thinking part of their brain. And so they're out of school a lot. By junior high, we see kids out of school for years, missing that kind of content, okay? And so how can we help them move that along to get the content that we need? So we've got a lot of projects that are going on in Southern Oregon to make that happen, but we know it's a pathway to poverty and homelessness. We know that if we can reduce those kinds of things, we start reducing homelessness, unemployment, the incarceration rates go down, disability and learning problems. Many of our children with disabilities in our schools are because of adversity, not because they were born with it. It actually happened after birth. I would say that's the majority of it. Okay. This slide is just meant to show you that population attributable risk. If you look at things like disability interrupted day off to the left there, or life dissatisfaction, but the inky spot there is the numbers there are to reflect. If you could reduce ACEs, that percentage would go away, because currently ACEs drive that amount. So a disability interrupted day, 52% of those situations are caused by ACEs. Had those ACEs not occurred for that person, no disruption to the day. That's what that means. So it has a direct impact on the workforce and also productivity, right? So if we had lots of time, we would talk about it, but we don't because I have 5 minutes. Let's do the resilience piece, because that's what we're going to talk about. What we know is that 2 out of 3 are impacted by adversity. 2 out of 3. So if we did the ACEs study in here real quick, there's a survey light you can do in like 5 minutes. You can already count up your number, right? We would see that about 2/3 of us would raise our hands. I've got 6. I have to raise my hand. It doesn't mean I'm defective. It means I've adapted to my environment. And I'm here today talking to a bunch of people. This should be terrifying. And maybe it is. And we're having a good time, right? So we can do this. We can be resilient. Positive interactions rewire. I mentioned positive, stable, competent, caring adults. Every positive interaction with somebody helps rewire. Lots of brain studies on adults. It rewires the brain. The brain is plastic and moldable. That's a takeaway. Alignment of biology and societal expectations, helping people who are struggling with what part of the brain they're in to learn how to get down here again. And we can practice. It's harder as an adult, right? But you can do it. If you want to do it, you can do it. And we can help people do that. And then building up the core protective systems. And there's 3 aspects to the core protective systems. So we'll do those. There's capabilities, attachment and belonging, and community culture and spirituality. These are the key pieces that if we can do together as a community, we actually decrease ACEs and we increases people's ability to stay on the job, to provide for their family, to stay keeping a family together. That's what that means. Positive just means I have positive capabilities. I love that little girl. Very curious. In most ways, we think about encouraging positive capabilities with your kids. You have to understand, in a lot of our homes, parents don't talk about that at all. So kids grow up with, I don't have any skills. When you have a positive capability, you have inherent value all by yourself. That's a resilience factor. If you have staff or if you yourself feel like you don't have positive capabilities, figure it out. You do. Help them find it. That will help them to be resilient. It will keep them here where they need to be, thinking on the job. Relationships are huge. This is about family relationships, but even if you don't have positive family relationships, you can do that as a community, as a work community. It's having good, positive, stable relationships with each other that help us when we have struggles. It helps us weather those storms. And then some way to be involved in the community. It is better to give than to receive. There's some science behind that. And when we help do something that's bigger than the rest of us, it actually enables us to be more resilient. It's a very cool thing. We do this all the time with kids at risk. We help them do service projects, and they walk home like with a smile on their face. They had no idea it was so important to be giving to other people. And how good do I feel when I do that? That's a resiliency aspect. These 5 things, I'll just kind of breeze through them, but you can use them if you wanted to, just to see, is my business area that we're working in, we do this with schools all the time, is it a trauma-informed area, right? Safety. Do people feel physically safe here and emotionally safe? That's a big deal. If you come from adversity, there's nothing been safe, right? So safety is a big deal. Trustworthiness, making sure boundaries are very clear. Choice, that we have a choice in prioritizing things. We collaborate and we're empowered to do that together. Those are really critical things. If your business is doing that, you're promoting resilience is what you're doing. That's a very cool thing. So what to remember, we're rounding it out. If people could act well, they would. If they are not, something happened. My knee-jerk reaction as a person is to get them away from me. If they could act well, they would. They're not. Their behavior's communicating something to me. And what I have to do is figure that out. So if they could act well, they would. If they're not, something happened. And maybe I need to say, hey, I can see that you're having, a difficult day today. What can I do to help you? Versus, I want to kick you out the door, right? When the brain is flipped, it is in the least likely state to resolve anything. And that sometimes takes a great amount of self-control, all right? I have a teacher who, after this training we did at school last year, had a kid who comes from a very complicated home. And he comes in usually Monday morning because the weekends are complicated, throws his stuff down, drops an F-bomb in front of all the kids and the teacher, and he gets kicked out. Teacher said, hey, remember the training? I remembered a line from the movie, the Paper Tigers movie. So the kid came in, dropped his stuff down there, and he said, I had about a second. I think I have that as one of the lines here someplace. I had about a second. And in that second, I remembered the training, and I remembered that if he could act well, he would. He's not. Something happened. So I asked him, I said, hey, I can see that you're having a difficult day. I want you to know that I care for you anyway, and I hope you'll stay. That particular kid had one of the worst weekends of his life. It's over a holiday, it was Thanksgiving. In his backpack was everything he needed to leave. He was expecting to get kicked out because that's the plan, and the teacher didn't do that. And he didn't know what to do, so he sat down. A week later, they talk about it. A week goes by, and he comes into the teacher and he says, hey, teach, last week? Yeah, I know. Well, I just want you to know that was probably the worst weekend I've ever had, and I needed you to kick me out. But what you told me was something that I don't hear at home, and it's something that I haven't heard for a long time, and that you cared about me and that you hoped that I would stay anyway after me being such a jerk. So I think I'm going to stay. And by staying there, he's around people that are helping him learn how to be here, not out someplace else, running around, getting into more trouble, because biology and societal expectations are not going to align. That kid came to the rest of first semester, came to the spring term, enrolled again this fall, and is a senior this year. I want you to remember, sometimes in about a second, that's all you've got to make a different reaction. I mentioned the brain is plastic, it can change. Sometimes it takes a second, and that's all it is. What to do? Pause, take a deep breath. Make a plan for stressful situations so you have an idea of what to do with that and help people who are quick triggers to have a plan to de-escalate themselves. Give them space to do that. Use a tool like the bullseye or something. Are you in the green zone, red, yellow light, whatever you want. Use something to help people out. Hand signals are great. Create opportunities for positive interactions. Every interaction rewires. Think about those core protective systems. Positive capabilities, relationships with family, community involvement. Those 3 things do a lot. Get your staff ACE trained. It's a significant thing. I'll stay around, you can schedule it with me. We've got 15 people now who can do trainings. There is no cost to this. It's important. Everybody needs to understand this. Change is up to us. You guys are great. Is this Q&A time? All right, I even get Q&A time. That's pretty sweet. All right. Yes, sir.
I was intrigued by your commentary about the generational poverty.
Yes.
Is that, and I use the term, I don't know if it's a term of art or not, but we inherited memory. Is it possible that we inherit memory from our ancestors and can have flashbacks about maybe past lives? Is that what that notion of past lives come from?
It's a great question. Not exactly memories of the previous generation, but conditions to be surviving. It comes to us, it's called the rat cherry blossom study. And essentially they took rats and they were trying to figure out, can trauma be passed along? And they figured out that if we could combine something totally benign like cherry blossom smells and a traumatic thing for rats, could we condition them to be, every time they smell cherry blossoms, would they react and panic as if they were being hurt? The answer is yes. Through about 4 generations, but the next generation, so these are male rats that were exposed to the trauma, so much so that when they smelled cherry blossoms and no electrical shocks were given to them, that's how they conditioned them, they still panicked the same way. Adrenaline, cortisol dumps, the whole thing. They separated, so then they artificially inseminated lady rats, let them have babies, separated the babies from the mother. So the babies have no connection physically other than being born, let them mature. Then they just blew in the cherry blossom scent, no electrical shocking from the conditioning from the male parent. The rats reacted the same way. So what we know is that no conditioning at all, the baby rats still react the same way. About 4 generations out, they didn't care anymore. So once the interrupt happens, it can go back to the typically developing DNA. What we know is that that's a survival mechanism. If you grow up with a bear, you're preparing your kids to grow up with a bear. That's what we learned about that. It's incredibly fascinating. Yeah, great question.
Dr. Bloomquist, over
Yes.
here.
Hi.
First off, hi. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Absolutely fantastic presentation and concept.
Thank you.
Absolutely fantastic. I really wish you would have been around in my 3rd grade year. I'm pretty sure I spent the whole
I know,
year like
me
that.
too, right? I
Sister
know.
Berger and Father
gotcha,
McCallion. I
yeah.
was terrified of those people.
I have a little therapy booth we'll set up out there. Everybody just come on over. We'll talk.
Just as much as anything, I hear you talking about a significant culture change.
Yes.
And to me, this is like an elephant. And you can't eat an elephant all in one bite. You can only control what you can control within the Grants Pass School District. In reaching out and getting this kind of approach, because this is an entirely different method of teaching / educating. This puts an onus on the educator. How is that being taught to the future educators and teachers? Are colleges on board with this and getting them the fundamentals of this program? Or are the teachers having to learn this when they come into the job and into the Grants Pass School District, for example, or other areas that embrace the ACES philosophy?
Yeah, great questions. I think I can answer those. So first of all, Southern Oregon University and Rogue Community College, I got to give them total props for this. I asked them, could they possibly have some staff trained, particularly in pre-service for our teachers, because right now I'm running all of the ACES training for our staff. Anybody new, you get a ACES training, so we're all on the same page, right? Three Rivers School District, they're doing the same thing for all of them. I also just trained me and about 5 other people, trained all of the Medford School District staff in their in-service week. So we're really seeing a commitment by districts to do this work all the time. But for SOU, for example, they have now 8 folks that have been trained in this work so that they can embed it into their curriculum. So all the pre-service teachers are getting this ACES training as they come to us. So that's a really great gift. The other things that are going on is just doing these public ACES trainings. So we've about 8,500 people now have seen some form of ACES training. We're starting to do public ones. And so what I'm doing is having an ACES training in our elementary schools once a month and inviting the community to come and have an ACES training, an opportunity to learn. incredible dialogue with mom and dad afterwards about, oh, first of all, I'm not broken. I've adapted to my world, but I am now doing things that are probably causing this generational thing to happen. And they're asking themselves the question, what can I do differently? And we are having amazing conversations. There is an initiative here in Southern Oregon called Self-Healing Communities Initiative. That work has helped align the Southern Oregon Success Group, if you know what that group is, the Systems of Care, which is a statute-mandated group to talk about wellness in our communities, the Youth Development Workforce Group, which is our K-12 population, our Early Learning Hub, which is early learning before kindergarten. All of them have agreed to do 3 things that come from the trauma-informed practices, which is people are safe and feel safe. Those are 2 different things, right? So what can we do in our organizations to help people feel safe and be safe? What can we do to help people have enough to sustain and stay in their place where they live? Because we have a lot of people that are moving around. In my world, I spend a lot of time with our homeless populations, so helping them find stability. And the last one is that I can have self-control. So now we have all these agencies in Southern Oregon working together on these same 3 concepts. These are not complicated concepts until you dig into them. But if everybody worked together in some way, shape, or form to bring the adversity down through these 3 initiatives, just like what they saw in Washington State, you would see all of our not-so-good data start flipping upside down. So when we reduce adversity as a community in any way that we can, particularly using those 3 core protective systems, that starts reducing adversity immediately. We start seeing it everywhere. So SOU, RCC, working very hard to incorporate this in their world. I'm hoping maybe some folks at the University of Oregon would also pick up on that, and they could start doing this core curriculum as well. Yeah. You're welcome. Yeah. Over there?
Oh.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Todd. What you've outlined today is a very concise description of the primary determinant of future public health.
Yeah.
And that's phenomenal that you can encapsulate that in the short amount of time you did. The other social phenomenon, of course, that's happening all around us is that the women are getting organized. You've got the Me Too and you've got the Time's Up. They're struggling with the answer to what's next. And I think that elements of what you have discussed here today are crucial to plugging that into answering what's next. Because you have to go beyond just divulging the sins of the past and setting up a legal defense fund to pay for that. You have to look down the road and say, gee, if we can get to these kids that are pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, and we can teach them stress management via breathing. We can teach them self-reliance, self-awareness, leading to self-confidence. And then we can teach them collaboration and communication skills so that they can get to mutual respect. Then all of a sudden, you've got a future level playing field. Mm-hmm. And I think that what you're talking about and the whole process of dealing with resiliency needs to also extend itself into the women's movement.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think for any movement, actually, yeah, for sure. And what we're doing with our early childhood development bits and pieces is giving everybody that kind of training to support all of our families and all of our kids so that they're having those tools. And I see that we're out of time, so I don't know if I sufficiently answered that, but we're working on it. How about that? All right. Thank you, everybody.